Thank you guys so much for being here today. The six of us are going to be having an open discussion on the topic of consent. This will not just deal with sexual consent, but just consent in general, its implications, and kind of what it means to us in this society. The six of us are all college students, which is a group that has very high rates of sexual assault, especially for college women. So this is giving us kind of like the perspective from that standpoint. I'm going to go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves. But to start off, my name is Faith Namshev. I am the victim advocate, outreach coordinator, and prevention educator at Rape Counselors of East Alabama. I am also a Master's of Social Work student at Jacksonville State University. We'll start with Kira.
Hey, I'm Kira. I'm a social work student at Auburn University.
Hey, I'm Annabelle. I'm a Human Development and Family Studies student at Auburn.
Hey, I'm Marie Ogletree. I am a Global Studies student at Auburn.
Hey, I'm Carl Almans. I'm an aerospace engineering student at Auburn.
Hey, I'm Salem. I'm a Global Studies student at Auburn.
Okay, perfect. Thank you guys so much. So we're going to start out really by defining consent. So the definition of consent is a clear agreement between two willing participants to engage in an activity. I know we commonly think about consent as being like sexual consent, and it can be, but it's not necessarily. There's consent in daily activities. Do you guys have anything to add to that definition of consent?
Sorry, you go ahead.
It also needs to include like the agreement can't be coerced anyway, like it needs to be like willingly given.
Okay, good.
Maybe a verbal agreement between both people participating in the whatever's going on.
Mm-hmm. Any other? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to go off of what Marie said when she said verbal, that there's no assumption that one side is making about the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's very explicit.
Okay. Yeah, those are all really good. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys the first question. So someone said that they're in a committed relationship, but they want to know if they should still ask for consent every time, or is that overkill?
Ask every single time.
Okay.
I mean, it's better to be overkill than it is to make a mistake and it not be consensual and then have all the implications of what happens after that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the circumstances are never the same, so you got to be careful.
Yeah, the nature of the relationship doesn't like override the need for consent or anything. You still need to ask every time. And even if you're in a committed relationship and do say yes, you always have the ability to change your mind.
Mm-hmm. And I think, go ahead, Marie.
It should never be assumed that just because you're dating, you're always willing to do what that person is willing to do at that time when they want to do it.
Definitely, yeah.
You're your own person.
Mm-hmm. So when I was kind of like reading up on this, I read something that said, as you're in a relationship, sometimes it can be even harder to get consent, just from the fact that you kind of have to like ask more in depth because there's certain, I don't want to say expectations, but people might be afraid to hurt their partner's feelings or make their partner feel rejected if they do reject advances. So it can be even harder at some points when you're in a relationship because some people might see that as not wanting to hurt their partner's feelings.
It can also be hard because if you're in a relationship or just with anyone and you've done like a certain thing before,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the other person thinks, well, we've done it before, like we could do it again. Maybe the other person doesn't want to do it again. So that can make it strange because it could be like a coercive situation where it's like, well, we did it once, like why don't you want to do it again? And so that can make it more difficult for the person to want to stand up and say no, even if they did it again or did it once.
I mean, because it would be so much easier to say, no, I don't want to sleep with you, some random person that I met at a bar 2 hours ago. It's way easier than saying, no, I'm not in the mood to your like long-term partner. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'll ask the next question. Is making out a sign of consent?
No, definitely not. Making out and consenting to having sex are very different things.
Okay.
Making out so superficial.
Okay.
You also need consent to make out.
Yes. The only thing, yeah, it's true. Okay. So what kind of consent am I given when someone agrees to come back to my place?
Nothing.
Yeah, the consent to be at that place at that time, but nothing else.
You can watch a movie.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I just kind of, my notes just basically said, agreeing to come over simply means that they are agreeing to be there, to be at the house, like Marie said. So yeah. Does consent only apply to sex? We've kind of answered this, but do what?
Oh, I was just gonna say that going over to someone's place, it's going back on earlier what Salem said about assumptions. Like just because you're there and it might be nighttime and you met them out in public or something, doesn't mean that like it's immediately gonna result in sex.
Right.
Or even making out or anything like that. It's an assumption. It's good to avoid assumptions and just be straight up when you're asking people about what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. Because like you don't necessarily owe someone something just because you agreed to go back to their place. And that is usually an assumption. Okay, so does consent only apply to sex? We've already talked about this, but what about other examples you guys could think of?
I watched a video today, and it was like a prank video, and they were taking pictures of people out in public, and they were like, no, you have to have my consent to like take a picture of them. So I feel like now consent is more like talked about even in like other ways, like not just about sex. Maybe that's just like the videos that I watch, but I feel like people will be like, you don't have my consent to take my picture, you don't have my consent to like, I don't know, do anything else.
I mean, you could also say, I mean, like me personally, I don't like to be touched. I'm not a really touchy person. So when people just like, grab onto me or hold my hand or something like that, I don't really like it because it's kind of invading my personal space that I didn't want to be invaded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good one. My sister, she went over to hang out with a friend at like the beginning of like all this Corona stuff, and she knows her friend hugs like a lot. So she lied and told her friend, instead of telling her, hey, I don't like to be touched, she said, my parents said you can't hug me. So, because of Corona. So it is interesting, and it's kind of awkward to have to say that, isn't it? It would almost just be better to ask someone, hey, are you comfortable with this? So yeah. And then I've also seen, because this is something I really enjoy seeing, like parents allowing their children to decide if they want to sit on Santa's lap. Because if you're telling your kid, if they start crying saying, no, I don't want to, I don't like him, blah, 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 just because they're scared, and as a parent, that person is probably not going to hurt them. But still making them do that when they've told you, no, I don't want to, is teaching them that their consent is disregarded. So I think that's an interesting point too. And even like that weird aunt or someone who like tries to pinch your cheeks or hug you, like even giving them an option to say, you don't have to hug your aunt. You can high five your aunt, like whatever. You don't have to do that. It is your body.
I kind of wish that Burley was just sitting on my lap. I wish that he would have asked for consent before he sat on my lap, but that's okay. I guess he just ran away. So.
Oh, Burley. Okay, this is an obvious one, but is the absence of no consent?
No.
Good.
That doesn't need a response.
You would be surprised.
There's a lot of
only a clear verbal agreement, like a yes, not the absence of a no.
That also takes into consideration people maybe being under the influence, like maybe they physically can't say no because they're just so out of it. But just because they didn't say no doesn't mean that they weren't thinking it or weren't wanting it.
Definitely. Okay, and that perfectly leads us into the next question. So how does consent work with alcohol?
Doesn't really.
I mean, I think that if you like a person and you actually want to continue, whatever you're doing with them later, you can wait until they're sober. Like if it's unclear of what they're doing. If it's that desperate that you need to do it right now, then get a verbal answer. Like, I mean, maybe even just like, I don't know. I just think that if it's that important that you do it now, then it's not right. If you can't wait, then there's not really a reason to do it. I got a little rambling, but I can.
No, yeah, I like that answer. Like, if it's worth it, you'll wait. Yeah, so I basically just had, it's tricky. You kind of have to ask yourself these questions. Can the person communicate to me clearly? Are they coherent? Are they sober enough to know what's going on? And if you can't answer yes to all of those, or you even can't not say no, it's really just better to wait. Because like you said, it's way better to not do it and just wait if you're really into that person. Because you wouldn't ever want there to be like any doubt or confusion surrounding it. Yeah, so. Any other comments on that question?
Actually, I feel like with that, it can also be hard. Like, I agree, like, it's better to just, like, not do it when there's alcohol involved, because you could have said, like, well, I asked her and she said that she was fine, but really, like, she's blacked out. So
Yeah.
that can make it difficult, too, because I feel like people can take advantage of, like, well, I asked her. Well, she's laying on the floor and throwing up. Like, that doesn't mean that she should.
Right. And I know some medications, if you take them and then you take alcohol, it like makes it even more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
Obscure.
yeah, and it like gets you drunk faster or makes you act like this. One example is this one girl was acting completely normal. Like even her roommate said she was acting completely normal, but then she woke up the next day and she didn't know what happened. So it's really hard and it's really, like I said, tricky, because maybe you are completely backed out, but you're acting in ways that aren't representing that. So yeah, I think it's just probably better not to, but.
Oh.
Okay, so why do you think people often get confused about the concept and the implications of consent?
No one talks about it.
Okay.
What it actually is or what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Never taught in schools, like in sex education or anything, and most states don't really have sex education, and media also portrays it as like a joke in most cases.
We live in a male-dominated society where men are expected to get what they want on command.
Okay. Yes. The gender expectations that women are supposed to be gatekeepers and like let things in, let things out, but they have to stop it. It's not expected that they were asked before it started.
Yeah, they might be too scared to kind of say no because they don't want to disappoint another person, kind of like in a relationship too. Like you've been going with this person, it's kind of an expectation that you say yes and let it go, even if you don't really want it. People are just afraid to stand up for what they really want because it might make them look bad in their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
go ahead.
Like if a girl like is assaulted, I've seen it where they're like, well, I didn't say no. Like they feel like I was assaulted, but then they think that it's their fault. Like, oh, I didn't say no, but that doesn't mean that that's okay. But I think like that part of it's not taught. Like just because you didn't say no, like we were talking about, doesn't mean that you wanted to like have sex with him. So I feel like a lot of the guilt is put like on the victim in that case because people aren't taught that the only way that something is consensual is if both people say yes and are coherent and all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
A lot of people also blame the way that you're acting beforehand, maybe like what you're wearing and kind of how you were acting. So just because, you know, maybe you're wearing something that's more risque doesn't mean that that's just like, yes, I want you to do whatever you want to me, regardless of what I say.
Yeah, she or he could just be very comfortable in their body and be very happy with the way they look.
Yeah.
I know that we've had people before say that they were, you know, scared to move forward or scared to press charges because they're like, I was so drunk. What if I did consent while I was drunk and I didn't remember it? And it's like, but you could not have consented because you were drunk. You were incoherent. You were incapacitated. But that really is like a fear and something that people believe like, well, maybe I did, but that's not real consent. Any other observations? Anything you want to freely say about consent?
I know we're working on like the education of it, but I think that it definitely should be more educated on. And like you were saying, girls and guys need to know that just because you were drunk and you said yes doesn't mean that it was consent. Like all of the little areas where it can be confusing, I think need to be addressed in an educational way so that people know for sure, like it wasn't my fault. Instead of just like a broad like. only yes means yes. You know what I'm saying? Like, go into those things so that, like, there's not a doubt if someone's, like, wondering if they consented or not.
Better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah. 100%.
It's also important to address kind of that consent goes both ways, because I think oftentimes when you're talking about lack of consent, you're saying a male is preying on a woman or something like that. But it can go both ways. Like a woman can prey or rape a male. It's not just, you know, one or the other.
Yeah, and especially males, like, they have almost an expectation to always want sex, to always be down for anything. I was watching a movie like 3 nights ago, and a guy went up to a girl who was drunk, and he was just like talking to her, being nice to her, and he's like, you know, if a girl has had 3 to 4 drinks and I don't take her up to my room, then the other frat guys will put me on kitchen duty for a week.
Is that roommate?
Yes, yes. And I was like in there, I was like,
What movie
that
was
was
it?
a rape joke. Like, it was just crazy. And I was like, this was just like, it was 2011, but it was 2011.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also the prevalence of rape culture in our society.
Yes.
Ew, I did not like that.
Yeah, I was just like, okay. And then she like kissed him, and I was like, girl. But yeah, I think the conversation just needs to be changed around it.
And I think that it needs to be brought up at a younger age too, not even in like the context of sex, but like at a younger age, they could teach like, ask somebody if you're going to touch their elbow, or, you know, something like that, where they understand like saying yes and no, just something as that.
Or just being more verbal with what you're doing, like, hey, I'm behind you, sorry, let me squeeze by. And like if you have to, like, you know, touch them just to get by so that you're not like, you know, rubbing up all on them, like, just say it, what you're doing.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. I know, along with like the Santa Claus example, they're trying to get parents, if they're like tickling their kid and their kid said stop, to stop, because then you're respecting their bodily autonomy, you're respecting their no, which is funny because I can think back and I'm like, yeah, my parents did that to me and I never thought of it like that. But then you might grow up and see a no doesn't necessarily mean a no. A no could mean I'm just messing around, I'm just kidding.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just an add-on question that I thought of. Do you guys think it's awkward to ask for consent? Or it can be?
Probably.
No.
I don't think it is. I think it's just like communication, and, you know, whoever you're around, if they're your friend or more, like, you should have communication. And so it shouldn't be an awkward thing to be like, are you okay doing this? Or like, do you feel weird about it?
It's something that's not talked about enough that people are comfortable with it. So there's a stereotype of it being like a taboo subject, so they're uncomfortable broaching it, but it shouldn't be in the actual act of asking for consent.
And even if it is for someone, it's like less awkward later to go ahead and have that awkward moment earlier. Because like if you just assume and then you do it and then later there's a whole lawsuit, like that's much more awkward than a 2-second are you ready like discussion.
Yeah, I think it's definitely awkward for some people though, because if it wasn't awkward, if it wasn't a problem, then none of this would be a problem. We wouldn't be having this discussion right now probably. If it was really easy for everybody, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely a practice thing. Like it probably is awkward at first, but then like once you get used to it and you kind of develop a communication style, definitely gets easier. So just everyone practice.
I mean, I know that I am very different than most people in that I'll say whatever I want at all times. But a way to think about it is if you're about to get freaky with someone, it's way less awkward to speak to them than to do whatever else you're
Yeah.
Maybe if you just think like, okay, that really isn't that big of a deal because of what's about to happen. So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just ask.
If you can't ask someone a question, you probably shouldn't be having sex with them. But
Personal, just asking them something.
I think this was a really good conversation. Do you guys have anything else you want to say or a comment on? Any pent-up anger about society, Kira? No, I'm just kidding.
Ooh.
All right. Well, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for participating today. This has actually been really great. I feel like I've been social, even during this quarantine, just getting to talk to y'all. And I just wanted for like anyone viewing this to kind of have some takeaways. First, if you're unsure or confused, the worst thing you can do is ask. Please ask. Do ask. It's not that big of a deal. Just ask. Better than you not knowing it's a no. 2, consent can be sexy. It doesn't have to make things uncomfortable, and it doesn't have to ruin the mood. If it's done correctly, if you practice it, it can be a part of the process. 3, consent is really just agreeing to respect one's right to decide what they want to do with their body, offering them bodily autonomy, and what they want to happen to them in regards to their person, a right we should all have. And lastly, an absence of a no does not mean a yes. So no does not equal yes. Thank you guys so much today for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.